Letter from countless causes to Mr. Goulburn, enclosing to him the proceeding, Frankfurt, on the May 1818. I have the honor to thank you for the kindness with which you have been pleased to inform me of the departure of my letters for St. Helena, as also of that of the pamphlets and journals with which you have been pleased to accompany them. I am sorry you should have found it necessary to preserve silence upon certain points in my last letter. My discretion will know how to interpret that silence. I owe it to the personal kindness which you have hitherto shown me not to return to the subject any more. I have written to Mr. the Cardinal Fesch, agreeably to a passage in your letter, that he may send by the way he shall think most proper the sequel of the Moniteurs, reckoning from 1808, addressed to the office of Lord Bathurst in London, that his lordship allows their transmission to St. Helena. As to the passage of your letter, sir, concerning the request which I had the honor to make you for a regular bulletin of the health of Napoleon in the name and on behalf of the members of his family, may I permit it to pray you will observe to my Lord Bathurst that the whole of the family of the emperor are not at Rome, that he has one sister and her family at Frankfurt, a brother and his family in Austria, two other sisters and their families in the vicinity of Vienna and Trieste, without reckoning others, all of whom would esteem it the greatest favor and would consider it a real gratification to their heart should the sentiments which induced Lord Bathurst to send regular accounts to Rome induce him condescendingly to allow of their being regularly transmitted to them also. I was not ignorant of the gratification which had been hitherto procured for Princess Borghese, but it did not extend from Rome to all the members of the family in Germany, where the route was then much more circuitous than that which I had the honor to request. Whatsoever title and right my heart might give me, perhaps to solicit for myself a part of this bulletin, I shall learn to renounce entirely and put myself completely aside, and not doubting but that the favor will be more highly appreciated by those for whom I solicit it, if it should come directly from Lord Bathurst rather than pass through my hands. I shall solicit therefore anew, and in the name of the Countess of Servilliers, the Princess Joseph Bonaparte, who resides in this city, that he will have the goodness to send her regularly the same accounts which he has the goodness to address to the Princess Borghese at Rome. The Countess of Servilliers will undertake to communicate them to all the family in Germany. Sir, I have learned from the public journals the unexpected return of General Gourgaud. This sensible diminution of the household of Napoleon, this new privation of one servant more, penetrates my heart, and has determined me to pray that you will please to request of Lord Bathurst to allow me to return to St. Helena, accompanied by my family. This intention and this desire will never forsake me, as his lordship may convince himself in the whole of my correspondence with Sir Hudson Lowe from the moment of my quitting the colony. I do not think it would be necessary to demand the previous consent of the Emperor Napoleon to this request, because I dare flatter myself that his answer would not be doubtful. However, if Lord Bathurst should deem it necessary, I entreat his lordship will make the demand himself. He will see in my letter to Longwood I have abstained from mentioning this circumstance, considerations of delicacy which his lordship will know how to appreciate have restrained me. The deplorable state of my health will be no obstacle. I am ambitious to go and find a tomb at the feet of him whom I venerate, and to whose cares I shall find it sweet to consecrate the last breath of my life. Countless causes. I lost not a moment on the receipt of the documents sent by Count Bertrand in dispatching a copy of them to each of the sovereigns at Aix-la-Chapelle. I took this opportunity to renew my entreaties. I implored them to succor the illustrious victim. A few days more, said I, and it will be too late. The physician whom they had snatched away from him, an Englishman, declared publicly in London that a much longer residence upon that unwholesome rock would cause his death, I ventured to represent to them that their humanity, the sentiments of their heart, might be arrested perhaps by formal denials, but would not their justice listen to the other side of the question? I demanded that I might be allowed to furnish them with it. I solicited the sole favor of appearing in the interest of this sacred cause, consenting, I said, if I did not prove the truth of the documents laid at their feet, that my shame and my blood should expiate my offense in having dared to oppose upon them. At the same time, I did not lose one opportunity, one instant, one thought which might have multiplied the chances of any success. I addressed myself to everyone who, I learned, had any influence over the hearts of the monarchs. I wrote particularly to Monsieur de la Harpe, the tutor of the Emperor Alexander, so known, so venerated, who I had been told was at that moment with him at Aix-la-Chapelle. Sir, it has been communicated to me, and I'm assured that you have deigned to take some interest in my situation and the constancy and efforts of that sentiment which has caused it and continues it. This generous emotion ought not to surprise me. Nothing that is noble, great, humane, and philanthropic could, in my mind, be strange in Monsieur de la Harpe. He is known all the world by the doctrines which he has taught and which he found only in himself. Sir, it will therefore be in the persuasion of the interest which appears to have touched you that I shall address myself to you in perfect confidence. I am assured that the first papers which I addressed in Europe touching the holy cause to which I have devoted myself to the last breath of my life, have been communicated to you. I dare to take the liberty of adding here a little supplement in the hope of assisting with powerful motives, the intentions, perhaps the efforts of your kind heart. I had a pamphlet of observations made on the rock itself and of the dictation of the illustrious victim, besides the circumstantial relation of everything that happened from our departure from Paris up to the moment when I was snatched from the fatal isle. These 2 documents, sir, will be delivered to you at Aix-la-Chapelle. You will find in them the latest details which have reached me. They will prove to you that ill treatment, outrages, and barbarity increase instead of diminish. You will be touched by them, I'm certain of it, and you would touch whomsoever you may discourse with on the subject, who upon the earth could remain insensible to such facts, to such a spectacle. I will add that the victim is attacked with a liver complaint, that this complaint is speedily mortal in the place and under the climate to which he is condemned. It is worthy of you, sir, to put in motion the virtues which you have created. The heart which you have adorned could not be shut against you. You have too well implanted the ideas of the good, the just, the magnanimous, for these glorious qualities to deny themselves so meritorious and so glorious an application. And what more worthy, more noble, or more grand occasion can ever present itself, whatever may be the condition of the mind and heart of the august object solicited? Nothing but glory lies in his attention and his sympathy. If he should recollect an old friendship, if he still retains an affection, nothing is more sweet, and never did a more moral spectacle present itself to the eyes of nations. If he hates, nothing is more grand, nor more magnanimous. This royal interest appears all that remains to complete his immortal crown. His splendid history expects it and solicits it. But is it fit for me to tell you so? What is there generous that I could conceive which would be new to you, or in fact to him whose character shines, to do him justice, both in the public annuals and their private acts of our affairs and of our times? I have had the honor to write directly upon this subject, but will my letter reach the august person to whom I have presumed to address it? I send you a copy of it that you may remedy it should there be an occasion. It will explain to you better than I can express it the nature of my cares, of my wishes, of my efforts, of my hopes. You will there see that politics are foreign to all my thoughts, that humanity, morality, and the affections of the heart are all that animate me. all that I pursue and invoke. These sentiments are calculated to be welcomed by you and well received by him whose feet I wish them to reach. I am authorized by the claims which they must have upon your heart to entreat you to assist me in attaining what I hope from them, or to guide me in a better way, if it exists, to obtain a hearing. Respect prevents me from availing myself of the favorable circumstance to seek a personal interview. But if I should learn that it was not impossible to be admitted to so august a presence, I would hasten thither with joy and confidence, notwithstanding my feeble and decaying state. All business is interdicted me. The pains of my head do not allow any continued occupation, and this is my most grievous torment. My heart is full of the sentiments and impulses which it is become impossible for me to put in practice. Countless causes. Neither upon this occasion nor any other have I ever had the slightest answer to any one of my letters. And if anything has been sometimes insinuated to me indirectly and with mystery, I was obliged to suspect it as a snare laid against my person, which was of small moment, or against my cause, which was everything to me. Thus the Congress ended, and not a word escaped from it in favor of Napoleon. In fine, I sought to stimulate even foreign talents, and in the number of voices and raised the pamphlet of a certain German journalist attracted sufficient attention to serve for a pretext to devise trammels for the liberty of the press. However, all the efforts which I had called forth were vain. All my cares were lost, and they left him to die. In fact, what could the bare truth avail with sovereigns without the protection of any address or the alliance of any interest against the insinuations of wicked men who watched with all the ardor of political fanaticism, private resentments, and eventual apprehensions? They acted so effectually that in the Council of Kings, fear, no doubt, prevailed over generosity. They demonstrated how dangerous universal interest rendered the victim. And it may be truly said, to the glory of generous sentiments, that public opinion was pronounced everywhere, and with great warmth, not less in Germany than in any other country, and perhaps in the sight of the high personages who were witnesses of it. This benevolent opinion did a great deal of mischief to him whom it meant to serve, as if it had been in the destiny of Napoleon that the interest of the Germans should become as baneful to him in adversity as their animosity had been fatal to him in the time of his power. Amongst the efforts to maintain the hideous captivity of Napoleon, there has been actually imputed to the English ministers a base intrigue, an unworthy deception. It was said that to confirm the wavering sovereigns, they had forged for the express purpose a pretended plot of escape. The imputation was founded upon the timeliness, eclat, and publicity with which the arrival of the Mosquito brig suddenly caused this news to spread through all Europe, a circumstance which, after it had once produced the intended effect, that of counterbalancing the public favor, gave room to no further mention, to no detail, to no confirmation whatsoever. An imaginary conjecture, no doubt, and in which the English ministers are probably culpable only in having afforded ground for suspecting them of it by the numerous antecedent cases in which they degraded themselves in acting against Napoleon. To my chagrin was further added the fear of seeing old persecutions revived against me in my peaceful solitude. The spring of 1819 was approaching. The excellent Grand Duke of Baden happened to die. Those who did not like us became stronger by this event, and it was signified to me without the knowledge of the new sovereign, perhaps, that I must quit the States of Baden. The order was given to me only verbally, and I was even informed that I should receive it in no other way. The motive for my removal, it was said, was the desire to live in close friendship with France, and the fear that my stay would be disagreeable to her, a motive that must excite a smile of pity. I disdain to say that the French minister had thought fit to leave me in repose. The intolerance of opinion had discovered another motive, to the full as ridiculous. The person charged with the order against me was very willing to grant me some days for preparation, but I was nearly like the Greek philosopher who carried his all upon his own person, and I would have set out at the very instant of the notification itself if Madame Las Casas had not been afflicted with a deflection on the trust which placed her in great danger. I assured him that I should only follow myself time to see her out of danger, and although they gave me the well-meant advice to solicit government for permission to remain, I still disdained it, and in a few days after I set out on my route for Offenbach, where Madame Las Casas was to join me when she should be in a state to travel. If I felt myself so much hurt by this unexpected treatment, it is because I had already forgotten all the vexations with which I had been overwhelmed by the English authorities, and that for more than a year during which I lived upon the German soil, I was not subjected to such forms, but on the contrary, I was spoiled by the favor, the interest, the respect of which I everywhere saw myself the object, even among those of a contrary opinion. And besides, on leaving Mannheim, I was far from being embarrassed for a new residence. Some friends, in their kind precautions, had sounded some neighboring governments. I was assured of a favorable reception in several. One of the princes addressed upon the occasion answered with a smile, yes, no doubt, he should be well received and well treated. Far from repulsing a man of this character, a prince who understood his own interest should have his courtiers vaccinated from him. However, in expatiating here so freely upon my success, I must not disguise my disappointments. Now and then I had also my little mortifications. All was not roses, and without reckoning the expulsion from Mannheim, for example, of which I was speaking, they found great fault in another place with the respect shown me, being, they said, one of those wretches who had arrested the King of France at Varennes, and who more lately had done perhaps still worse. In another place, a baron who gave a grand soiree informed his guests that he had at length ascertained who this count and counselor of Napoleon, whose arrival had made such a great noise in the city, was. He informed them, nothing but his cook from St. Helena, and that not having means to pay his wages at parting, he had as a compensation created him count and counselor of state. If the baron believed what he said, he was assuredly a good easy man, and if his object was only to make his guests believe it, he must have taken them for great simpletons. The pleasant part of the story remains, sure, we must tell the whole, and it is that, in fact, the cook from Longwood had passed through a few days before, and thus it appears how anecdotes and the biographies of the saloon are engendered and multiply, and the devil himself cannot afterwards eradicate them. I could smile at the wickedness or the stupidity. Their acts and their words are only ridiculous and grotesque, but a circumstance of an important nature presented itself which would have distressed me excessively if I did not know how much the massive error which presses round sovereigns may impair the soundness of their judgment. I was assured that someone at the Congress of Aix-la-Chapelle, finding himself disposed in the presence of the Emperor Alexander to touch upon the frightful situation of Napoleon, and citing the authentic statements produced by me in his support, that prince answered, we must not believe all that this man has come to tell us in Europe. He is an intriguer. How is it that the most enlightened princes are deceived, even those from whom we should expect better? Unless it was here, as with Napoleon, who often used peevish expressions after his own manner, and not implying harm, and besides, by good fortune, I have still on my side time, that true crucible of characters. Years have since elapsed, and the unanimous opinion, I dare to hope, of all those who have known or followed me would sufficiently clear me from such an accusation. an intriguer, I who have worn out upon a rock all the vanities of this world, I who in the clouds of long would have seen all things from so great a height that they remain small indeed to my eyes, I who of all people on earth know nothing to desire, I, in fine, who no longer, considering myself of this world, cannot have, and in fact have no other ambition whatever, no other wish than that of Diogenes, that they would not stand between me and the sun. From my arrival at Offenbach up to my return to France. Offenbach is a handsome little town of the Grand Duchy of Darmstadt, situate upon the main 2 leagues from Frankfurt. I settled myself there, according to my custom, in a sort of little hermitage. It was upon the bank of the river, within a step of the town. My headaches, under their different symptoms, had never quitted me. At Mannheim, I suffered very acute pains. A short time after my arrival at Offenbach, my illness suddenly assumed a character new, insupportable, and alarming. It was then that an universal indisposition and increasing debility commenced, which, preventing the employment of all the faculties, brought with them the complete disgust of life. Then also commenced that sudden trembling in my limbs and in my whole frame, those sudden visits of dimness of sight, which I might call the twinkling of existence. How often in this state, and without taking any notice of it, have I gone to bed with the thought I had almost said the hope of awakening no more. Madame's causes, in the excess of her anxiety, wished that I should give up every kind of occupation whatever, of which, in fact, I was absolutely incapable. She suppressed my letters and wrote to the relatives of the emperor to apprise them of my real situation and prevail upon them to appoint a successor to me in the cares which I had created for myself for a long time past as a precaution. I myself had entreated them to join with me a person whose happiness it would have constituted, and the choice of whom would have been agreeable to the emperor. He was then with one of them, but from one cause or another this was not done, and necessity compelled me to break off without any provision having been made to supply the deficiency. I exhausted in vain all the aid of medicine, and if the domestic cares and tender solicitude which surrounded me on every side could have availed, my illness would have been only a blessing from the pleasure of seeing them lavished upon me. One loves to dwell upon that which was sweet, and I could not assuredly better describe the great interest felt for me and the nature of the recompense which the sentiments I had shown, the efforts which I had made to obtain for me, than when I say my little hermitage has been honored with the presence of 3 queens, and I think on the same day 2 of them, it is true, had been deposed, but they did not the less command everywhere at that moment, by the elevation of their minds, the simplicity of their manners, the eclat of their other qualities, universal respect, at least as much as the era of their greatest splendor. It was in Offenbach that the little colony which Cardinal Fesch was sending to St. Helena was addressed to me on its way to that place. It consisted of an almoner, a surgeon, a physician, and a valet de chambre, all chosen by the cardinal. Upon my arrival in Europe, I had written to him to be assured that to send a priest capable also of writing to dictation and of assisting a little in business would be very agreeable to the emperor, and I had employed his intermediation to interest for that purpose the conscience of the Holy Father, who in fact demanded it of the English ministers, who had hitherto opposed the measure or attached to it inadmissible conditions. It was also from Offenbach I dispatched along with 2 charming portraits, one the young Napoleon painted from the life in the same year and sent by King Jerome. The other was that of the Empress Josephine by Saint, a present from the Queen Hortense. It was mounted in a magnificent tea caddy of crystal. This choice of crystal was a delicate precaution of the Queen, who also had the mounting executed in a manner to render it impossible to suspect any concealment of writing. The former of these 2 portraits reached its destination. The valet de chambre of the Emperor has since told me that Napoleon, on perceiving seized it with avidity and kissed it. I who know how reserved the emperor was can judge from thence the whole extent of his joy and satisfaction. As to the portrait of the Empress Josephine, it never arrived at Longwood, although by a singular contrariety. It was found in consequence of some memorandum to have paid the custom house fees of its importation into England towards the end of the summer. Madame Lescazes, by order of the physicians, carried me to the waters of Schwalbach, where I was an object of pity to everyone. I returned without having derived any benefit from them, but a circumstance that revived my strength for an instant and caused me to quit Germany. All of a sudden, I learned from the public papers of the return of Madame Montholon to Europe. She had been, like myself, repulsed from England and landed at Ostend. I was not able to resist going to seek authentic details of which I had so long been deprived. I hastened to rejoin her, whether she should be permitted to stay in the country or should be forced, after my example, to run up and down the highways, for in that case I should be useful to her. I had experience traveling with mystery, for I remember too well all the ill treatment I formerly received in the Netherlands. I joined Madame, the Countess of Montholon, at Brussels. Not only was she free to reside there, but she had been received with the most particular respect, and a journal of the place having announced that she would be obliged to continue her route, a semi-official article refuted this news, sustaining itself upon this ground, especially that the Netherlands were the land of hospitality. I wanted no more. Belgium appeared to me nearly as France. In the midst of the Belgians, I should think myself amongst my countrymen. I wrote therefore to Madame Lescazes, our good fortune, that she might hasten to come and join me, and shunning Brussels for the same reasons which had made me leave Frankfurt, I chose Liege, remembering the tender reception which I had there experienced at the time of my unfortunate passage 18 months before, and I settled there not without apprehension of some new ill luck, but I was in the wrong, for I must with truth and gratitude say that during 2 years and a half I have since traversed the country in all directions without any request, any solicitation, not even a previous announcement. That country, formerly so baneful to me, has ever since been the land of hospitality, never having afterwards had occasion to perceive any authority whatever, otherwise than by the tranquillity, the repose which I enjoyed under its shade. Influence and foreign malice had ceased. It was at this time that my son requested leave anew, and on his own account, to return to Longwood. I have the answer of Lord Bathurst, who refused it. Subsequently, the Princess Pauline, who succeeded in obtaining leave to repair thither, wrote to me to know if my son wished to accompany her. But then, alas, it was too late. Neither the affection nor the care of my friends at Liege, where I remained the whole winter, nor the rural situation of Chaudefontaine, where I spent the spring, nor the generous hospitality of the worthy and good proprietor of the charming place of Justlandville, who forced me to accept for the summer, at a few steps from him, the dwelling of Johann at the gates of Spa and Verviers, nor the benevolence of all his family, so numerous, so kind, so respected in the country, were able to ameliorate my condition or fix my stay. And yet it would be difficult for me to describe, as they deserve, the extreme benevolence, the touching dispositions, the sympathetic spirit of the whole population of these countries, so prosperous, so rich, so flourishing under the imperial reign, and continuing so grateful. How often in my solitary walks in the country, people, the artisans, returning after having crossed me, have exclaimed, "Long live good friends and fidelity," sweet words which stirred the heart. How often, if we wanted some pulse or other articles, have we not been obliged with the poorest of these people to have them brought in the name of some neighbor, because to us they would be willing only to give them? How many traits of this kind I could cite, and how many of another nature too, but I abridge as much as I can. I write in haste. Moreover, I feel myself embarrassed at finding myself alone alone in the scene, and yet I do not like to leave a gap. This should be on my part a sort of settled account. I spent my second winter in Antwerp with some sincere friends whom I tenderly love, and whom my arrival on the expedition to Flushing 10 years before had produced for me. And in the spring I reached Malines without any particular motive, for I was not able to remain a long time in the same place. I stood in need of change. I was the patient who agitates himself and turns in his bed seeking in vain the sweets of sleep. Twice during the 2 years in Belgium, Madame Lascazes wished to take me to the south, and twice at the very moment of setting out, imperative circumstances happened to stop us. Disappointments, however, which were to us so many real favors of fortune. But for the first of them, we should have found ourselves advanced a day's journey within the frontier at the very moment of a fatal and sanguinary catastrophe. And but for the second, we should have arrived at Nice precisely at the moment of the constitutional explosion at Piedmont. And no doubt that in both cases, and naturally enough, we should have been subjected to at least temporary inconvenience. Meanwhile, the Congress of Laybach was held, and I could not refrain from attempting new solicitations. I addressed a new letter to each of the 3 high sovereigns. The following is that to the Emperor Alexander. Sire, a new solemn occasion presents itself by preferring to your majesty my humble and respectful accents. I seize it anew with eagerness. I am little afraid of rendering myself importunate. My excuse and my pardon are in the generosity of your soul, sire, to recall at this moment to your recollection, and to that of your high allies, the august captive, whom you a long time called your brother and your friend, to seek to divert your thoughts and theirs to that victim whose cruel suffering is always present to me. This is, I know it, to make the knell of death heard amidst joy and feasting. But therein, sire, I trust in the eyes of your majesty yourself I fulfill an honorable and pious duty, the performance of which must remain always sweet to me, however perilous it may be. Sire, reduced to a state of infirmity and weakness which leaves me scarcely able to connect a few ideas, I follow the instinct of my heart in default of the faculties of my head, in contenting myself with reproducing literally here to your majesty the note which I presume to address to you at Aix-la-Chapelle, for the circumstances having remained the same, no change having since taken place in that respect, what could I do better than to replace under the eyes of your majesty the same picture, the same facts, the same reasoning, the same truths, only if in despite of that which I then thought was certain, the illustrious victim, contrary to my expectation and that of the faculty, still breathes. If he has not yet fallen, I shall dare to observe to your majesty that this unexpected prolongation of his life, which has been to him only a continuation of his torment, is perhaps to your majesty a blessing from heaven, which Providence reserves for your heart and for your memory. Ah, sire, there is then still time, but the precious moment may at any moment escape from all your power, and what would be then the tardy, impotent regrets which could neither assuage your heart nor restore for your memory an act magnanimous, generous, out of glory, the sweetest, the most moral, the most commendable to posterity, the best understood perhaps with which you could have embellished your glorious life? I mean oblivion of injuries, disdain of vengeance, remembrance of old friendship, in fine, the respect due to royal majesty. To one of the Lord's anointed. Sire, since my return to Europe, separated from the society of men, a prey to hopeless sufferings, derived at St. Helena itself, belonging for the future, and unalterably much more to another life than this, I ardently raise every day in my retreat my hands to the Almighty, praying that he will deign to touch the heart of your majesty and to enlighten it upon so essential a part of its interest and its glory. Countless causes, what prophecies in so many of these lines. Alas, they were scarcely under the eyes of the monarchs when he was no more. He had ceased to live, to suffer. On opening the Moniteur, I found there the fatal announcement, though it could not surprise me, having been a long time certain to my understanding, I was not the less struck, overcome, as at an unexpected event that was never to happen. The next day, I received a melancholy letter with circumstantial details and conjectures for which these details might have furnished matter, and this letter terminated by saying it was on the 5th of May at 6 o'clock in the evening, at the very instant when the cannon was announcing the setting of the sun, that his great soul quitted the earth. On the report of the death of Napoleon, it must, however, be said that there was but one single cry, the one same sentiment in the streets, in the shops, in the public places. Even the saloons showed some feeling. The cabinets alone showed themselves insensible. Shall I say insensible? But after all, it was natural. They breathed, at length, at their ease. During his life, in the time of his power, he had been assailed with pamphlets and libels. On his death, we were suddenly inundated with productions in his praise. A contrast, nevertheless, it gives a little relief from so much meanness of the human heart. There were everywhere and from all parts compositions in prose and in verse, paintings, portraits, pictures, lithographies, and 1,000 little things more or less ingenious, proving much better than all the pomp of kings could do. The sincerity, the extent, the vivacity of the sentiments which he left behind him. A curé on the banks of the Rhine, the place of whose residences had received some particular favors from the emperor, assembled his parishioners and made them pray for their old benefactor. In a large city of Belgium, a great number of citizens subscribed for a solemn funeral service, and if they abstained from the performance of it, it was much more from etiquette than a consequence of any interdict. Then these words of Napoleon, which I have often heard him repeat, were verified. In course of time, nothing will be thought so fine, nor seize the attention so much, as the doing justice to me. I shall gain ground every day on the minds of the people. My name will become the star of their rights. It will be the expression of their regrets. And all these circumstances are verified in every country and everywhere, without reckoning things of this kind, of which I am no doubt unaware. A peer of Great Britain shortly after said in open parliament that the very persons who detested this great man have acknowledged for 10 centuries there had not appeared upon earth a more extraordinary character. All Europe, added he, has worn mourning for the hero, and those who have contributed to that great sacrifice are devoted to the execrations of the present generation as well as to those of posterity. 2 German professors, whether they had always known his real character or they had been cured of their national prejudices, have erected upon their grounds a monument to his memory, with some inscriptions indicating that with him fell a funereal veil over the rights of people and the ascendant impulse of civilization. Our writers have defended his memory, our poets have celebrated it, and our orators in the legislative tribunal have proclaimed aloud the attachment which they had felt for him, or that they are honored by the distinctions which they had received from him. Nothing remained for me but to return to my country, and crossing the frontier at the end of this second emigration, I could not avoid thinking on the circumstance of my return after the first, and what a difference of sentiment distinguished them. And I seemed at every step to advance amidst a hostile population. Now I felt as if I was entering into my family. I soon beheld again all my companions of Longwood, and while embracing them, I could not deny myself one melancholy reflection. We were all met again, but he for whom we had sought the fatal rock, he alone remained there, and I recollected that he had told us it would be so, and many other things besides. I learned from all these eyewitnesses the details and the circumstances of the ill treatment which since my departure had been daily increasing, and I saw that the times which I had known had not even been the most unhappy moments. I read his last will. I there found my name 3 or 4 times in his own hand. What were my emotions? Surely I did not stand in need of them for my reward. For a long time I have carried it within my heart, but the remembrances, however, were dear and sweet. How much more precious were they to me than millions? And yet he joined to them large sums from those of his family who were most nearly connected with him and were dearest to him. If they ever pay them, so much the better. That will concern them hereafter more than me. I should have liked to consider myself only as a kind of depositary. I even wished to anticipate them, but I found it necessary to stop. My means did not allow me to make these advances. My happiness would have been great in affording a retirement to a few civil and military veterans. In our long evenings, we should have often spoke of his battles or discoursed of his heart. At last I received, thanks to the zealous interposition of one of the finest characters of the English peerage, the papers which had been detained from me at St. Helena, and which, in spite of all the strength of the laws, I no longer reckoned upon. In the situation in which I found myself, with the sentiments with which it had inspired me, I felt myself under the indispensable obligation to assist, since I had some means to do it, in making better known him who had been so misrepresented. And in spite of my infirmity, I set about the work. Heaven has blessed my efforts in permitting me to reach the end, and to finish it, however ill. This I have the happiness to do at this instant. If I have succeeded in reconciling hearts, if I have destroyed prejudices, conquered prepossessions, I have obtained my dearest, my sweetest object. My mission is accomplished. Passy, August 15th, 1823.